for my dreaming soap. Welcome to my channel and thanks for dropping by. It's got really chilly here in the UK recently, and would you believe it, our boiler broke a few weeks ago, and trying to get someone to come and mend it has been a complete nightmare. So we've been without any heating or hot water for about a month now. So that's really made me start to think about winter. And I thought, what about a perfect opportunity to do a Winter Woolies type soap? So come on, let's go make some soap. So I'm going to start off my soap by making some embeds to go on the top of the soap. So I'm just taking this standard extruder disc. It's the one with the holes that are about 1 millimetre wide each. It's just a standard disc from your normal extruder set. And I'm going to use this to extrude soap of 2 different colours. So for me, there's going to be some pale pink and some sort of creamy gold colour. Now I want to use this to make a stripy scarf, so I'm just going to lay 5 rows of the different colours, alternating them as I put them next to each other. And once they're lined up, I just want to cut them into the size that I want on the top of my loaf. And here's my incredibly high-tech measuring piece of paper, but it does the trick and gets all my little scarves the right length. Once I've got them to the right length, I'm just going to lift each scarf up and pop it into some cling wrap. And then I just want to gently roll over the top, so I've actually got a flat effect on the scarf, and also so it binds those little bits of soap dough together. And then just to finish the effect on the scarves, these are only supposed to sort of represent a bit of a scarf, so I'm just going to break apart the very end bits of the scarf so it looks like the tassels that you get on the ends. So next I'm going to use an extruder disc with these tiny weeny mini little holes, and I must admit, when I first got my extruder set I thought, what the dickens would I ever use that disc for? And haha, today is the day. I'm going to use this to make my pom-poms on the bobble hats, and I want both colours in my pom-poms, so I've just squished the colours together. And I'm just going to extrude this long hair-like soap dough, and I think scale-wise that will work really well to look like the wool in the pom-poms on the bobble hats. I'm hoping by doing them this way that you will actually see sort of the strands of wool rather than just doing a solid ball of soap dough. I've also just roughly rolled up some very small balls of soap dough, and these are going to go in the middle of the baubles, just to give them a little bit more structure rather than just being this very fine, very thin soap dough. So hopefully they won't get all brittle and shatter. They'll have sort of a little bit of substance to them. So I'm just gently wrapping my sort of very thinly extruded soap dough around each of those little balls. I'm squishing it gently just to get the shape, but I'm not squashing it too much because I don't want to just turn it into a flat ball of soap dough. And then lastly, I'm just extruding my mittens in a mitten extruder in 2 parts, so I can have the glove part as the sort of goldy colour and the cuff part as the pink colour. And lastly, let's do our bobble hats. Now I want my bobble hats to show the knitting stitches on them. So I've made a little knitting stitches impression plate here, and I'm just going to roll each of these bobble hats along it, and so I can create that pattern. And for the bobble hat itself, all I did was rolled up a round ball of soap dough, and then I pushed it onto the counter to flatten one side of it. So let's move on to the inside of the soap, and the colours I'm using are neon pink from Mica Mama. Now I'm not going to use this as a neon pink, I am going to tone it down with some titanium dioxide to turn it into more of a pastel colour. I'm going to use the TD on its own as well to give me a white, and then I'm also going to use some golden shimmer from Mica Mama. I've melted all the oils and I've got my lye solution for my entire soap, and as normal I'm soaping between 80 and 90 degrees F. And I want the inside of my soap to look like, you know, those jumpers that sort of have a pattern as a sort of band across the centre. So I want it to look quite wintry, so I'm going to put some snowflakes in. I don't want it to look Christmassy, but I do want it to look wintry. So I'm going to be doing a layered soap to get those bands in different colours. Now I want 2 of my layers to be the gold colour, so to keep that gold colour consistent in both layers, I'm pouring off all the oil that I need for both of those layers into one jug. And then I'm going to mix the gold mica into that, so I've got a uniform colour through all that oil. So for my first layer, going to be fairly straightforward. I just need to pour off the amount of oils that I've calculated that I need for the layer, and also pour out some lye solution from my batched solution that's made up. And the fragrance oil I'm using today is white cashmere from Scent Perfect in the UK. And then I'll just blend these together. Do be careful, if you already have mica in your oils, it can sometimes be a lot more difficult to see when you've reached emulsion. As I'm doing layered soap and I'm actually going to scrape this layer, I'm not too worried if I go past emulsion, and actually something like a light, even to perhaps a medium trace, is going to be perfectly fine here. Do be careful not to take it too far. Sometimes people think because they want a layer to set up quickly, they like to blend it so it gets quite thick and then they have to wait for less time. The thicker you blend your batter, the more likely it is that you're going to get air pockets in your soap. So you always want your batter to still be nice and pourable, even if it's quite thick. As soon as you're spooning it in or blopping it in the mould, then you're causing air bubbles. So we can just simply take that batter and pour it straight into the bottom of our mould, and then just set it aside until it's set up enough for us to scrape that layer. So when we've got our soap set up a little bit, it's no problem with just testing it with a spatula to see if it's the right consistency. And the consistency that you're looking for is a soap that will hold its shape and not flop back into where you've just dragged it from. But you don't want it too stiff. You don't want to be dragging through and having a lot of force on your scraper, because that can then just bring other bits of soap with it and you won't get a nice clean scrape. Now what I'm doing here, and something that I will typically always do, is I'm always very conscious with these type of scraped soaps that you can waste a lot of soap. Fine if you want to make guest soaps or other soaps, you can just pop it somewhere else. And sometimes it doesn't worry me. If I need some soap dough, I will deliberately make a little bit extra and use it for soap dough. Now if I know I don't need some spare soap to use elsewhere, I'll make the minimum amount possible. And as you can see here, I know my scraped shape is going to be sort of a V going down to the centre of the soap, so I'm just moving it and putting the soap where it needs to be, rather than pouring a whole load flat and then scraping loads and loads out. And then once we're ready, we can just pull the scraper across the loaf. Now you may need to do this a few times and go back and fill in any bits that haven't scraped nicely. And that's fine, as long as your batter hasn't set up too firmly, you've got a little time to work and play and get the perfect scrape that you need. And then once you're happy that you've got a nice clean scrape, don't forget to clean up the edges and the sides of that soap mould. My next layer is going to be pink. Now I want this to be a very pastel type of pink, so I'm just literally dropping in a tiny bit of my predispersed neon pink mica, and then I'm just going to bring that down to the pastel I want with, again, a tiny little amount of titanium dioxide. Then just pop in the fragrance oil, and I'm just going to stick blend it, which I don't normally do with my fragrance oils, but I want this trace a little bit thicker, and then we'll just pour this into the mould as well. Now I want this pink layer to be the layer that sort of goes across the middle of the jumper, as it were, and I want it to be filled with little stars and snowflakes. So I've extruded some stars and snowflakes, and I'm just going to drop them into the batter as I fill up this layer. One thing to be careful of, especially with like this snowflakes, is you need to make sure you get the soap right into the centre of the little embed. So you can either make sure you're pouring them with your batter pretty fluid, or what I quite often do with the snowflakes is I actually pour a little batter on them first outside the mould and make sure they're completely covered, and then I pop them into the soap and then scrape the rest of that excess batter in on top of them.
There's some stains on your photo, little cracks on your rusty frame.
And then as those final embeds go in, again I'm going to make sure I'm getting them fully covered and filled with soap, and then I'm just going to use my spatula and just make sure that they're pushed down enough in that V shape so that they don't get hit when I go through and scrape with my scraper.
All these wicked nightmares has gone cold. Now we go way back.
And then once I'm happy that everything's in an okay position and my soap is set up enough, I'm then just going to scrape the top of that pink layer. And then I'll just repeat the same process for the last two layers. So one more layer of the gold and let that set up, scrape it, and then just finishing off with a layer of white.
But you're okay. I don't have the pieces of your home buried in the flashbacks. All these wicked nightmares has gone cold. Now we go way back, as far as way back goes. Still
Now I did do an extra couple of jobs whilst I was waiting for the layers to set up. The first of that was cutting up the little mitten embeds for the top of the soap. Now because this soap dough is still reasonably fresh and I've kept it wrapped up, it's still nice and moist, so as I'm pushing my knife through, it's actually sort of joining those two parts of the mittens together. And if any of them do actually come apart, that doesn't matter because we're going to use a little touch of soap to hold them onto the top of the soap anyway. And then for the bobble hats, remember some of that soap that I scraped out of my goldy layer? That's still quite nice and pliable as such. It's sort of like a thick piping consistency now. So I'm just blopping a little bit of that on top of each of the bobble hats because I don't think just a little bit of distilled water is going to hold those bobbles on top, but a little bit of soap will be perfect. And then once each one has got a little blob of wet soap, we can then start sticking the bobbles on top. And just to give them a better chance so they're not sitting on a rounded pointy bit on the top of the hat, I'm just going to very gently just press in with a little measuring spoon just to flatten that peak off a little bit. And then just last of all, I'll go around and check that there's no sort of overspill of that soap that I put on and just brush any excess away. And then I just let those sit to the side while I was pouring the rest of the layers, and by the time I'd finished they were nice and firm and ready to put on the soap. So once the soap is firm enough to support the weight of the embeds, but still wet enough so that they'll stick, we'll just pop those on the top. And then once I get to the mittens, I want those to be sitting on top of the scarves. So once again, I'm going to use a little bit of that leftover wet soap batter to just make sure I can attach those mittens on top of the scarves and they won't fall off. And then as we finished, I'm just going to gently cover the soap, making sure I don't damage those embeds, and then C-pop it as normal, so into a pre-warmed oven at 170 degrees F, 75 degrees C. Turn the oven off as soon as the soap goes in. I then leave it in there overnight. So here we are the next day, and look at me with a shiny new soap cutter. Now this is the very first time I've used it, so I can't give you any sort of reviews or anything yet, but I will link it in the description below. So here's our soap after it's all saponified, and I'm really pleased with that top. It does look super cute. So let's get it cut. And we'll have a look at some of the bars from the loaf, and then I'll just leave you with some final pictures of the soap. I hope you've enjoyed this video and you like the soap. If you have, it would be great if you left me a thumbs up. If you'd like to see what I'm making in the future, why not subscribe to my channel? If you've got any questions or comments, then please leave them in the comments section below. Thanks for watching everyone. Happy soaping!